He's gonna have to fight! Bang! Pressure's coming! Dumped! Hogtied! When you've given everything, what will the record books say about you, Matthew?
And welcome back for Season 2, Episode 42 of White Noise Sports with Tanner White. Let me be among the last to tell you Happy New Year. Here we are putting this episode out on January 2nd. I was not going to rush this one to beat the new year. Last week, Fantasy Football Friday, still focusing more on injury reports than anything as opposed to matchups. Then the best rivalry in the NBA just might be forming between the Thunder and Spurs, if the last few weeks are any indication. And lastly, the wherever they play athletics, the MLB team out there in the West somewhere, gave out the biggest contract in the history of their franchise to Tyler Soderstrom and have now locked down a great outfield trio for years to come. And this week, we are right back to Fantasy Football Friday, right in the middle of the championships. You're only going to get this one and probably a retrospective / recap of the whole year in fantasy for the rest of the 2025-6 season, so hang on to it. Oh, so much to think about here if you're still playing fantasy football. I know there are some people that aren't. Let's assume that you didn't have your championship last week and you haven't lost in a guillotine league or that there's some sort of consolation ladder. That means you're likely playing in something close to an ESPN standard league, and that's where I always tend to target my tips. It seems so right to me that you should play fantasy football all the way through the end of the regular season as opposed to ending in week 17. Why wouldn't you want to feel a little bit more emotion around the games when so many of them are deciding playoff races? And that's exactly the first consideration that I want players to make this week when setting their lineups. Man, shout out to the NFL again for adding that 18th game to the regular season, trimming that preseason down. Here comes the final set of tips and tricks to wrap up your playoffs on the strongest note possible for Fantasy Football Friday. The big headline for this tip is going to be consider players and teams' motivations. This first one is really obvious when it comes to certain players. The Chargers announced on Monday that they were going to rest Justin Herbert and start Trey Lance at quarterback, so you really want to downgrade all Chargers skill. That was a relief to me as somebody who has tried to throw darts at Ladd McConkey and Quentin Johnston multiple times this year and been badly let down with some low single-digit scores. It's not so obvious when it comes to other players. I'm thinking a bit about the Rams and Cardinals game on Sunday. Marvin Harrison Jr. should be one of the best young receivers in the game, but he has been strongly limited by injuries this year, and he's going to sit for the final week. Jacoby Brissett has a 1-10 record as the starting quarterback with the Cardinals this year. Kyler Murray is on season-ending IR. James Conner, the starting RB, only played 3 games before getting hurt, and one would think Arizona has zero reason to try to win this game. But I really have to emphasize how much I love spoiler teams. The Rams have lost 3 out of their last 5, with 2 notably inferior teams in there, Carolina and Atlanta. They struggle at times in outdoor bad weather games, and there is some rain in the Inglewood forecast this weekend. And I've told you time and time again that Jacoby Brissett has been one of the most consistent fantasy quarterbacks practically ever this year. He has only had 1 bust this season 2 weeks ago against the Falcons. The signs are there to me that the Cardinals are going to give the Rams a serious run for their money in that game, and Sean McVay has said that the Rams are going to play their starters. The only 2 playoff possibilities for the Rams now are the 5th or the 6th seed, but you'll get a much more friendly matchup with going on the road regardless if you get that 5th spot. When you find any team in the spoiler role, similar to what the Cardinals and a few other teams are in this week, I think you lean into them for fantasy purposes. The other big ones I see on the schedule, Miami at the Patriots. That could shake up the number 1 seed. Washington at Philadelphia. Indy at Houston. The top playmakers from each of those already eliminated teams are looking pretty juicy on waivers and or on my bench right now. Next tip is around the barren wasteland that is the tight end position. Again, it feels real eerily similar to last year. If you do not have the Cardinals' Trey McBride, who just set the all-time record for catches in a season by a tight end and has scored over 100 more PPR points than anyone else, you have a potential hole in your lineup each week. George Kittle missed Week 17 and has missed 6 games overall on the year. Travis Kelce is just diminished, call that what it is. Evan Ingram was once a PPR monster and he's now disappeared. Jake Ferguson is hurt with Dallas. You have to positively scour the matchups and get really nerdy about things like most common offensive personnel groupings each team uses to even have a vague idea of the best tight end to stream. I wish I was kidding or I had better advice, because I just picked up Taysom Hill last week and I got a literal 0 out of him in a championship. I slotted him in place of Brock Bowers, who went on IR, and I didn't have a whole lot of notice on that, but I have never felt so betrayed. In Week 16, Taysom throws a touchdown, catches 4 of 6 targets for 36 yards, and is the leading rusher with 42 yards. Then the next week, the only thing he gets is 3 carries for no yards in Week 17 and a 0. That was sickening. The names you'll want to watch for on waivers: I like reliable veterans. That often leads me to consider the Patriots' Hunter Henry. Every single year, this guy is just decent. There's just nothing wrong with him. He's hit a career high in yardage this year, with Drake May playing at an MVP level and leading the league in completion percentage. And I like his 7 touchdowns on 55 catches. That's a solid rate. The Texans' Dalton Schultz fits this bill too. Over 100 targets on the year, and although he is not explosive, I'll give you that, he is highly reliable, catching 76.5% of his targets. And lastly, it's possible that the Bears rookie Colston Loveland is still available on waivers, depending on the depth of your league. He's the one that doesn't have a stranglehold on the top tight end spot on his own team. Cole Kmet still sees 69% of the offensive snaps with the Bears to Loveland's 63%. And yes, you can have lots of 2 tight end sets like the Bears do and have both of them on the field for obvious reasons, but Loveland has outperformed Kmet in everything and is coming off 6 catches for 94 and a touchdown last week. What else do you need to do for your championship run? I think one trap I've been caught in, and have seen a few too many other people, especially in my own leagues, caught in, is always starting your stars. It sounds counterintuitive to ever bench a star, but the definition of a star player is fluid. Justin Jefferson is the number one example I can give here. Everyone knows he is one of the best receivers ever. He's going to challenge a bunch of records before it's all said and done. We also know that he's wide receiver 25 this year in PPR, and he's going to have the least productive year of his career in every way this year. He might go under 1,000 yards for the only time in his career here in year 6, and he's only caught 58% of his targets because the Vikings quarterback play has been foul. The Jaguars' Brian Thomas Jr., another star from last year that people were forced to ditch, hopefully, a long time ago. He's PPR wide receiver 44 this year after ranking 4th last year as a rookie. His catches and yards have practically been cut in half, and he's scored 2 touchdowns this year to 10 last year. Now, every other week, some of the other Jaguars receivers are passing him up, whether it's Parker Washington or Jacoby Myers. If you drafted Thomas within the first 3 rounds, as everyone certainly did, you likely didn't end up even in the playoff discussion. But if you do still have him around on your bench, or you like his matchup this week, don't fall into temptation. When the player's situation is just too hopeless, be willing to give up, as sad as that is to say. Sour notes aside, I hope everyone had fun this season. It's been wacky, the short term has been volatile, but as you learn the longer you play, the long term becomes more and more predictable. Still planning to do a little bit of a retrospective of the whole season in fantasy next week, and then move on until next year's pre-draft rankings. There's a lot of things in sports that I've never even thought about taking on before, and I know fantasy enough to cover it whenever it's relevant, whenever the season starts. We didn't do a Fantasy Football Friday every single week during the season, but I felt it was enough for myself to get the practice of talking and thinking about it, and for people who wanted to pop in occasionally for tips. I am in love with playing myself, and I have championship berths in each of my leagues this year, although that doesn't prove that any of my thought processes or draft strategies or the way that I obsessively scour the waivers works. It does feed back into my cycle of wanting to learn and get better to improve my results. Hope I've spread enough of the good fantasy word for you. Catch you one more time next week for our final Fantasy Football Friday of the season. In other news in the NFL, it looks like the Diggs family just took the biggest successive L's in recorded history this week. Trevon Diggs is the corner for the Cowboys, but you likely knew that. He is less than 2 years into a 5-year, $97 million deal. And I want to just stop right there because I have never heard of such a thing. 3 years and that kind of money left for a player just to get straight up cut. The Cowboys did make a very financially wise decision when they offered that deal because it was not guaranteed against injury for the last 3 years of it, as far as I can tell. I'll give you an article to read on that and see if you can figure it out. More on Trevon in a moment because he might not even be having the worst week in his family. Stefon Diggs is the one that plays receiver, seemingly with every team, but currently with the Patriots. Now, he is accused of assaulting one of his personal private chefs with strangulation. And you know how organizations' statements always read because they have to. The New England Patriots are aware of the accusations that have been made regarding Stefon Diggs. Stefon has informed the organization that he categorically denies the allegations. Out of respect for all parties involved and given that this is an ongoing legal matter, we will have no further comment at this time. It's so lame, but that's how official statement works, right? I understand somebody has probably paid a lot of money to write those things. So Trevon Diggs is on waivers, able to be claimed by anyone. Stefon Diggs isn't going to sit for his arraignment until January 23rd, shortly before what would be the date of the AFC Championship game. And there's even one more Patriot in some boiling hot water this week to get away from the Diggs brothers. Christian Barmore is also under investigation for domestic assault, and all the while the Patriots might be the best team in the entire NFL. These are all good football players, man. Stefon is over 11,000 career yards. Trevon has 20 career interceptions in only 66 games. Barmore has 47 pressures this year as an interior D lineman, but they are all in a bad way right now. Like everyone else, I thought head coach Mike Vrabel would run a tighter ship than this when he came to New England in January, especially after succeeding Gerard Mayo, an ex-Patriots player just like Vrabel. And Mayo was probably too lax and too buddy-buddy with players. He wasn't a whole lot older than them. Of course, you give these players with insane abilities so much praise. You build up their egos and the many millions of dollars, and they're bound to get into some stuff off the field. This is a tiny bit of a tangent, and I've been trying to hint at it, but I do see New England as a potential landing spot for Trevon before the playoffs starts. He would get to practice against and play with his older brother. His price tag to play a game would be less than $500,000, which is crazy, but it's not nearly, a season's worth of salary for a player of his caliber. And he would have additional time to learn the playbook if the Patriots were able to wrap up the number 1 seed and the bye. For New England to get that top seed, they have to avoid all of the distractions of the week or quiet them. They have to beat the Dolphins on Sunday and hope the Chargers win. Only issue is, as mentioned earlier on in the episode, the Chargers are resting their starters for the most part and playing the Broncos, who also need to win for that number 1 seed. And one more LA team making an appearance here, the Los Angeles Angels are finally going to make a cameo appearance in an episode for a positive reason. At least mostly positive. They're going to wipe away the biggest stain of a contract in perhaps the history of pro sports. I think so anyway. The team agreed to a restructured contract with third baseman Anthony Rendon, noted lover of baseball, that will finally give both sides the out they so desperately needed. To introduce the story to anybody that's new to it, Anthony Rendon was a nearly MVP level player a couple of different times in the first arc of his career. He played 7 years with the Nationals and had 3 top 6 finishes in MVP voting. He was an above-average defender at a valuable defensive position, and he finished his age 29 season leading the league in RBI and doubles. He would sign a comically large deal, especially at the time, of 7 years, $245 million, and would then go on to have one of the most dramatic fall-offs and falling outs ever in sports. Now, I'm not going to retell the whole story, but I will link a video from one of my favorite YouTube channels made the cut on the subject. The long and short of it, a really good 2020 when he was 10th in MVP voting in the COVID season. Since then, 257 total games played between March of 2021 to now, with an insane run of injuries and long rehab and constant questions about his effort and commitment and hip labrum surgery shortly before the season started this past year. When the team announced the contract restructuring, it also came out that Rendon isn't expected to play this coming year at all. That would make 257 out of a possible 1,032 games over 6 seasons that the guy has played in, all while collecting, from what I can tell, over $190 million of the value on the deal. If anything more than tearing down Rendon, I want to applaud his financial genius. and his agent Scott Boras. We know how Boras does. Finally, this reworked contract lets the club spread out the pay for the last year of the deal, being the coming year, 2026, across multiple years, and then peacefully, blissfully letting him walk after the coming year. Rendon will be 36, I believe, when that deal runs out, and he hasn't played what one would call a full season since 2019, but it would be a great troll job if he wanted to have one of those later career offensive surges when most people assumed he was done playing about 5 years ago. I think I'll make this week's poll about the worst contracts in the history of sports. The ones that age like milk. Off the top of my head, I always think about Albert Haynesworth as the barrier breaker in the NFL. The first $100 million defensive contract, I think it was. The Tigers right now, unfortunately, with Javier Baez, although he did perk up for some of this season. Russell Wilson with the Broncos, that didn't last long and was ugly, and they had to pay for him to go and play for other teams. You could argue for a number of NBA deals that are $50 million or more a year, but that's just kind of how the NBA works, that a somewhat above average player can make more than the best NFL player in the world. I guess if I had to point to one right now, it would be Jaylen Brown. Is that 5 years, $285 million to not be the best player on his own team? I don't know. I'll be super interested to hear maybe others' ideas on some of those all-time worst contracts and maybe exposit on some more of them in the future. I'll just need like an alliterative name for the segments. I'll get right on that. And another week down here on the show. 10 episodes to go in Season 2. I'm deciding that now that I'm going to make a season a year. I really think I'm going to change the cover art as I have a lot of professional headshots and action shots of me that are higher quality and reflect what I actually look like a little bit more than the current one. When that happens, I think I'll go back and change all of those retroactively and see if we pick up any steam by doing that. Thanks for coming back week after week, or if you're relatively new here, as always, happy to have you. Either way, check out all my socials, Instagram, TikTok, Threads, @TheVoiceOfTanner, X, just Voice of Tanner, YouTube, the whole thing spelled out with spaces. Leave a like, comment, and share. Catch you next week. This has been Season 2, Episode 42 of White Noise Sports with Tanner White. Thanks for joining me.
He's gonna have to fight! Bang! Pressure's coming! Dumped! Hogtied! When you've given everything, what will the record books say about you, man?